What's the civilization-ending event humanity isn't ready for? Story 1. A slow burn collapse is much more likely than a single major event to cause something major. You're absolutely right. It's not going to be a single event. It'll be multiple systems failing at once, several minor crises converging like a rogue wave. Crop failure leads to political unrest, while there happens to be a particularly incompetent leader in charge, which leads to war, which leads to a limited nuclear strike. Meanwhile, an earthquake strikes, and then there's a fuel shortage. After that, a minor solar flare knocks out electrical systems for only a few days, but it's at a really inopportune time. It won't look like a world-ending event. It will be a gradual decline in living standards over years or generations. The Romans experienced a near civilization-ending crisis in the 3rd century due to multiple destabilizing events hitting around the same time. War, plague, inflation, political breakdown, famine. But it didn't happen overnight. It was slow. It took years for the system to collapse. It also took years and multiple leaders to diagnose and remedy the problems. But they did get there. Story 2. The Big Rip is one of the most interesting possible ways for the universe to die, because it happens on scales a human could meaningfully experience. You'd go from a perfectly functional solar system in an endless void to the end of all matter in the span of a couple of months. First, the planets drift away from the star, but you could survive if you have a way of producing heat. Then the planets and the sun explode as gravity can no longer hold them together. If you're in a spaceship, you can survive for a few more minutes before your atoms are ripped apart by space itself. Story 3. I rarely see the media being concerned about water. Water scarcity or droughts have the potential to severely mess up entire stretches of land, triggering climate refugee waves. So there is some danger in the foreseeable future regarding global political stability. If, for example, California or parts of the Middle East or Africa become partially uninhabitable. But desalination technology powered by renewable energy is catching up massively, and water itself is extremely abundant here on Earth. I'm confident this is a problem technology can fix to some degree. Story 4. I'm an archaeologist. Civilization isn't really used in the field anymore, but that's a different topic. Most cultures or societies don't really have a traumatic end date. They mostly just change or have new things that alter their cultural constructs or socio-political constructs. New ideas, inventions, innovations, attitudes, languages, external stuff going on, internal stuff going on, religious beliefs, etc. These can alter a culture pretty quickly without it being traumatic or even noteworthy. But for something huge that most people aren't aware of, agricultural destruction of arable land, often from irrigation in the past, but often it's just the soil wearing out, so to speak. Story 5. Solar flare knocking out electric grids. Not only restarting them from a black start is highly complicated. If the transformers are fried, there aren't enough replacements. And to manufacture more we need, you guessed it, electricity. The estimations are that a solar flare on the level of the Carrington event, which happened not 2 centuries ago, would cause trillions in damages and set back civilization for decades. Every time I see someone talk about this, there's always a ton of people who like to respond with, that actually wouldn't be bad because we did it before. Here's the facts. The entire world is now more reliant on computers and the internet than ever before. If we suddenly lose all that interconnectivity with no way to quickly restore it, a lot of people will die. People love to fantasize about rebuilding society, but nobody understands that they'd be the ones to suffer and die doing it. Story 6. Chronic wasting disease spreads from deer to people. It's caused by prions, which I'm not remotely qualified to comment on, but the gist is that they are nearly impossible to destroy. Apparently they can't even be destroyed by incineration level heat. I'm certain there is someone who can elaborate on this further in a far better way. From what I learned about prions from another post years ago, prions are misfolded proteins that basically run amok doing whatever destructive thing they like in your body. They are, as you said, incredibly difficult to destroy. They can be denatured, but it's never a certainty. Story 7. Insect decline. I'm sure a lot of people know it's an issue, but I don't think people realize quite how precarious it is. When I was a young lad, my family drove from our home in the southeast of England to Scotland. We went to see family on the Isle of Skye. By the time we got there, the number plate was covered in bugs, seriously covered. Had speed cameras existed back then, they wouldn't have been able to read the number plate. Midges galore. Fast forward to last year, my family did the same journey. We put some sticky tape over the front number plate because we were doing a community research thing for my daughter's school. The tape was needed to catch the bugs, as cars are more aerodynamic now than they were 30-odd years ago. When we had completed the journey there, we counted 6 flies, 1 wasp, and a moth. That was it. This is obviously a small sample size, but it does suggest that insect numbers are declining. No insects, no anything else. Story 8. False vacuum decay. That our universe is not in fact in a stable state, but a metastable one, where a transition from one to the other wipes the universe clean with zero ability to see it coming. Blink. Reality is gone on a universal scale. You thought you were important, or your family and city, country even, the planet that you are familiar with, the moon in the night sky, the midday sun, the wider galaxy in our expanding electromagnetic shell, telegraphing our location in history. Blink. Gone. Every star and every galaxy, every bit of space in between and beyond, all gone. Just like that. Flip. Story 9. Humankind invents a cheap and incredibly useful material, which is rapidly adopted and soon becomes ubiquitous, but decades later discovers that it causes infertility. As birth rates plummet below the replacement level, there is a half-hearted attempt to limit use of the material, but large segments of the population refuse to be inconvenienced or pay somewhat higher prices. Within a few generations, humans cease to exist. Millennia later, aliens discover an odd world inhabited by giant plastic-eating insects. Story 10. Since the Industrial Revolution began over 200 years ago, our oceans have absorbed around 1/3 of all CO2 released from fossil fuel. Put another way, humans have transformed the chemistry of the ocean. The average acidity of seawater has increased by 30% due to our activities. We are at a tipping point. Soon our oceans will be so acidic that they will break down the shells of crustaceans like clams, oysters, lobsters, crabs, etc. At that point, the ocean food chain will collapse very quickly. Story 11. Microplastics. We do not know what the final effect will be, but they are everywhere. In us, our organs, our unborn children, Mount Everest, the Marianas Trench, everywhere. These plastics are known endocrine disruptors. Drop the fertility rates enough and everything collapses within 50 years. Microplastics found in the arteries of human beings for the first time ever. In a recent study conducted by researchers from the University of Campania, Luigi Vanvitelli in Italy, a surprising discovery was made. Microplastics were found within arterial plaques. These tiny plastic particles, measuring less than 5 millimeters in length, were present in approximately 60% of the plaques removed from patients with atherosclerosis. About 60% of study participants who had undergone a carotid endarterectomy, a surgical procedure to remove plaque from the carotid artery, had measurable amounts of polyethylene within the plaques extracted from their arteries. Additionally, 12% of these patients had polyvinyl chloride, PVC, in their arterial plaques. Health implications. Individuals with microplastics in their arterial plaque were 4.5 times more likely to experience a heart attack, stroke, or death within approximately 34 months after their surgery, compared to those without plastics in their plaque. Story 12. Common issues as a result of poor hygiene. People don't actually realize how far back we'd go without soap. The availability of tampons and pads has more weight on the function of our world than anyone is actually willing to acknowledge. Can we exist without a toothbrush? Certainly it's only 250 years old. We've gotten to a point where we don't know how to manage without these things. The collapse of society is going to be inconvenient, but the first person who whips out their phone to look up an all-natural DIY alternative to acetaminophen, only to remember there's no internet, is going to lose his crap. Story 13. The Kessler Syndrome. It's basically a cascade of orbital debris. It just takes one big collision or explosion in the right orbit, and then each satellite that gets destroyed contributes to an exponentially expanding cloud of debris that keeps us out of orbit for an indefinite time, probably generations. Eliminating satellite communications and GPS would grind not just telecoms, air travel, and data to a halt, but also things like international freight, which includes crude oil and an awful lot of food. GPS and anything in geostationary orbit is relatively safe from Kessler syndrome because it is so much further away. Kessler's impact would be on LEO's satellites, which is still a hell of a lot of things, and would dramatically increase risk for attempting to launch anything more into LEO. You would have to wait for everything's orbit to decay and burn up in the Earth's atmosphere before starting over, and that will take several months, maybe up to a decade to happen, not generations. Story 14, I'm mostly freaked out by the fact that if there was a world civilization collapse and the machine stopped, it's more than likely that we would never get it restarted again. There are not enough easily accessible materials left to build a world civilization back up to the level it is today again. So if we mess it up this time, that's it. We will be stuck in the Bronze Age until the end of all life. Story 15, not many people know that the sun is gradually getting hotter. In a few billion years, it will be too hot on Earth for liquid water. A lot of people know that the sun will explode or expand into a red giant in about 5 billion years. But Earth would long be what we consider uninhabitable by that point. The habitable zone that you hear people talk about when referring to other planets, Earth won't be in it in a couple billion years. When it's actually nearing time for the sun to die, the Earth would already be a blazing inferno of a planet. Story 16, greed. The top 1% have more money than what they know what to do with. So most of it just sits there generating more money and more money and more money. No real use for it other than buying politicians and changing regulation to keep hold of more money to generate more money. Meanwhile, most people are struggling to live. While those people are struggling to live, the billionaires aren't easing off their wealth accumulation, they're ramping up their wealth. As you can guess, this is not sustainable. You can see a slow decay in society at present, but it'll exponentially get worse. The world is going to be a different place in the next half century, possibly back to nothing in 80 years. Story 17, I have a few. Ocean acidification. Atmospheric carbon is being absorbed by the oceans. It is very close to a breaking point, like 2040 to 2050. It will not be able to support carbon-based life at some point. Microplastics, they're everywhere, and studies are finding them in everything right down to human placentas. Not to mention nanoplastics, which are pretty much unstudied, but even smaller than micro. People are thinking it may be linked to the uptick in childhood cancers in the last 20 years. Crop failures. It's going to be very bad going forward. Growing seasons are changing worldwide, but massive storms, droughts, and floods are wreaking havoc everywhere. Countries that export will export less, prices go up for us. Countries that import won't get as much, prices up for them. Countries that rely on humanitarian aid will suffer a lot more. Biodiversity loss. We're losing bugs, birds, etc. The food chain is breaking down right in front of us, and no one is batting an eye. It's happening in the water too. Plankton and microorganisms of the like are disappearing dramatically. Diseases, bird flu is ravaging birds around the world, literally like North Pole to South Pole. It passes on to humans too, I'm told. It's really just a matter of time before it mutates enough to kill everything, but right now, it's mostly seals and birds. That's just the tip of the iceberg though. Many southern diseases are moving north and they don't respect borders. I don't know what prions are, but they're becoming more common and could be the next COVID-like outbreak. Story 18, solar flare. They basically can act as EMPs. Most power infrastructure does not have independent cells that can close themselves off from a cascading, rolling blackout. See those crazy blackouts in the 90s that took out basically most of the eastern US. You get a solar flare that hits the planet and everything electronic based dies. That means no running water or lights. Scarcity and post-apocalypticism would quickly ensue as resources dry up. We had one in the 2000s, but it missed the planet. We have no way to really defend against them. Story 19, antibiotic resistant strains of plague. Pharmaceutical companies haven't done much work, if any, on creating novel antibiotics in the last few decades due to them not being super necessary or profitable. If a strain like the one in the article became more mainstream and spread beyond the borders of Madagascar, Africa could experience a Black Death of its own, easily disrupting the world's economy, let alone spreading throughout the world's population. Story 20, Antimatter. If anyone figures out easy, everyday production and storage of antimatter, say simple enough that a hobbyist could produce it at home in their garage, it'd be so amazingly dangerous. Probably the end of the world. Any random person could level an entire city. There's enough bad actors out there, we'd have a real problem. This isn't 100% hypothetical. Antimatter is already produced via various processes, CERN, etc. It's just extremely expensive and difficult to store. It's quite possible with advances in knowledge and technology, this will become a reality. In fact, this is so dangerous it's a potential Fermi paradox solution. Story 21, Economic Collapse. We are so dependent on our money having value that we'd run around like headless chickens if it were ever to collapse. People think economic collapse only happens in great calamity, huge solar flare frying out digital electronics or something like that, but it can happen when the majority of people lose confidence in the money they think they have. And with the way inflation is rising now on top of price gouging, we're looking at a very real possibility of that happening in our lifetimes. Money is merely a tool meant to help serve people as a means of granting autonomy over how we earn and spend. When that tool stops serving people, they will look at other means to do so. Story 22. I am heartily convinced that while climate change and natural disasters will be the end of the world, hackers will be the end of society. Many of them are sponsored and funded by nation-states and are already in our critical infrastructure with advanced persistent threats, APTs, and the like. It's just a matter of when they decide they want to push their finger on the scales, and suddenly, boom, electrical grids, drinking water, sewage systems, you name it. We are already seeing chaos caused by these groups when they ransom hospitals and schools. The fact we hook critical infrastructure up to wider networks, and then just shrug when it comes to funding securing them when we do, is literally insane to me. We are effed, and people would rather die than use different passwords across services because they don't understand or care why it's important. Story 23. After reading these posts and comments, I have changed my mind. Since civilizations die slowly, I am going to suggest one of my favorite things: junk food. Junk food has low nutritional value, but super stimulates the appetite, meaning that lost people will continue to eat even while full. Certain types appear to be addictive, so it's hard to give it up. So, junk food increases the obesity rates, possibly increases diabetes and heart disease, as well as cholesterol and high blood pressure. Not just for one generation, but for succeeding generations. In addition to raising healthcare costs and taxing healthcare resources, this means that there are fewer people fit enough to serve in the military, which limits national defense. Shorter lifespans in younger generations mean fewer workers to support the elderly and retired, as well as increasing the number of disabled people who are unable to work. This first leads to a dystopian society, where the few who can, after eating healthy, remain healthy, while the masses get sicker than ever and poorer than ever due to medical bills. Then eventually, there are not enough workers to support society, and it breaks down. Edited to clarify, by junk food I am referring to all ultra-processed foods, including the ones that pretend to be healthy by making health claims. Story 24. We had a huge rolling blackout in Ohio a few years back. I'd put our aging electrical system as the current top dog for toppling America. It doesn't help that electrical production is actually the one source of emissions. For some reason, people see removing vehicle emissions and replacing it with electrical emissions is the future. We're not actually fixing the problem, and we're creating a problem for our aging electrical system. I'm sure I'll be hit with downvotes and liberal rage, but it's true. I hope California is actually ready for 2035, not a Republican, right-wing, or a Trump supporter. Story 25, Economic Burnout. People are so ignorant of history. We've actually convinced ourselves that capitalism is somehow intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a tool, and all tools decay. On a large enough time scale, all economic systems are intrinsically unstable, and indications are fairly good that we're entering the end stages of capitalism. The trouble is, we've demonized the very idea of having this conversation, much less discussion about how we move past this system. That means there's going to be nothing there to catch us as we fall. And while globalism is nothing new, what is new is the degree to which our economies are entwined in the modern age. When one major economy succumbs to the ravages of late-stage capitalism, it will tear down all the rest, and literally nothing can stop it. And it's the most likely disaster to strike our era after global warming. Indeed, global warming itself is a capitalist phenomenon. so the degree to which these are separate issues is debatable. Story 26. High altitude EMP detonations. It's rarely discussed in pop culture, but it's considered one of the most probable and devastating weapons. Fungi adapt to consume organisms with warmer body temperatures, which could happen as the climate warms. There's no way to protect the population from fungal spores. They're everywhere, and it takes immense resources to make even tiny spaces 100% spore-free. Example space programs have struggled against this since forever. UAP phenomena turning into one of many possible existential threats, of many potential origins other than just space aliens or classified military tech, though the implications of these phenomena being military tech is almost equally ominous. Story 27. Unprocessed and untreated global mental health epidemics. What happens when everyone is too depressed to function or contribute to society without a daily regimen of pills? But if not, then water scarcity or resource scarcity. I don't think most people truly understand how much work and resources go into something as simple as mass production of the food we take for granted, even if you just had to produce enough food to feed a town of 100 or so people every day. You have no room for margin of error, especially if you were in a doomsday bunker of sorts. While it wouldn't end the entire world by itself, a major cataclysmic eruption of supervolcanoes like the ones underneath Yellowstone would mess up a lot. I think it has the ability to expel more than 1,000 cubic kilometers of rock and ash at once, 2,500 times more material than erupted from Mount St. Helens. Story 28. Losing toilet paper. Like if all toilet paper was gone. We'll just use bidets. And then watch as water gets more expensive because more of it is being used to wash out hoo-has. Also, if a toilet has a bidet but has those brown stains on the porcelain, you know the owner never actually took a minute to see what the output hose looks like after a few months and clean it out. Nasty. And that's assuming a roach or a house centipede doesn't go into the hose. Story 29. Global phosphorus crisis. Phosphorus is an essential part of modern farming as it is used to make fertilizers that make normal soil abundant and less fertile areas able to grow food. Currently, we are running out of accessible sources of minerals with harvestable phosphorus. Without it, we would have to return to agricultural practices from the 18th century when the global population was an eighth of what it is today and starvation was not uncommon. Additionally, our failures to control phosphorus runoff is triggering toxic algae blooms that are killing off aquaculture resources, thereby threatening fisheries around the world, and burying the phosphorus we need in ocean sediment. Story 30. Being too bothered with each other to realize the universe will not wait to end humanity. Not in one singular scenario we aren't aware of, but thousands. Viruses, natural disasters, cosmic anomalies. Has anyone ever watched that Marvel show Loki? Something people neglect to realize is that doomsdays are relative. There are plenty of villages and cities that have experienced large-scale annihilations through history. The truth for them is that civilization as they knew it has ended, and it can for everyone else too. If we don't bother to put our abhorrent natures against one another in check to realize humanity isn't some singular, massively intelligent civilization impervious to everything, will become yesterday's news. Accept that conflict and confusion will never 100% leave your lives. Accept that any answers or viewpoints one or many have can and will be questioned, if not by other individuals or groups, then by the universe itself. Consider the paradox that is life. It doesn't have to be rocket science. We help ourselves because we want to survive, so we have empathy for other humans, and we help them to survive too. Because we may be the most intelligent creatures we know of in the universe, but until we can find a way to even hold relative peace, 40, 50, 60% of us on Earth, there's no way we are the most powerful, and while we worry about small things unconcerned with our species' survival, the universe presses forward without stopping, beautifully, terrifyingly, and with absolute power over the fate of humankind.